In the weeks that followed the foiled wildfire plot, King Rhaegar Targaryen slept but little. He roamed the Red Keep's corridors at odd hours, ensuring that no smoldering ember of his father's madness remained. Servants and guards alike would find him peering into dusty storerooms, examining old ledgers that listed the Alchemist's Guild's past deliveries, or simply standing in a deserted gallery, gazed distant as if listening for the footfall of ghosts. All through King's Landing, people whispered that the king was haunted, whether by guilt, by prophecy, or by the memory of what nearly consumed the city. No one could say for certain. Yet Rhaegar did not neglect his royal duties. Having survived a second near catastrophe, he seemed more determined than ever to guide Westeros toward stability and peace. Still, the swirl of duty did not end at politics. Inside the Red Keep's private chambers, a new chapter was quietly unfolding. In the final days of King Aerys' life, his queen, Rhaegar Targaryen, had been heavily pregnant. She had remained in King's Landing after Aerys' death, partly out of shock, partly because Rhaegar insisted on protecting her from the chaos of the war's final convulsions. In due time, she gave birth to a daughter, Daenerys Targaryen, on a rain-lashed night that rattled the castle's shutters. The labor proved difficult, and Rhaegar, exhausted by grief and illness, never recovered. She slipped into fever soon after delivering the babe and passed away at dawn, her final breath a broken whisper of names lost to the years. Thus, Daenerys came into the world under tears and storm clouds, with no father to hold her. Aerys' corpse had long since turned to ashes and dust, and with a mother who could only cradle her once. Rhaegar, confronted with this tiny, wailing infant, felt a swell of conflicting emotions. She was, in truth, his half-sister, the last child of Aerys and Rhaegar, and that meant she was his responsibility as king. As he stood at Rhaegar's bedside, gazing at the wrinkled bundle of red-faced new life in the wet nurse's arms, he promised himself that Daenerys would never be used as a pawn for petty cruelties. She was the future of House Targaryen as well, an innocent future untainted by old sins. He named her Daenerys Stormborn, for the wild storm that crashed against King's Landing the night she arrived. From her earliest days, she was fostered in the Red Keep's nursery alongside Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys, Rhaegar's own children by Elia Martell. Servants sometimes marveled at the quiet bond that formed among them, as if the three older children instinctively protected the littlest princess whenever they played in the castle's gardens. Elia herself took a kindly interest in Daenerys' welfare, unwilling to let the child grow up friendless. In time, Daenerys would call Elia my lady mother. Though Rhaegar took care that the girl understood who her real parents had been, in all their sorrow and darkness. Viserys Targaryen, meanwhile, barely 10 years old at the time of Aerys' death, had stood at the margins of the realm's tumult. He had been the Mad King's second son, overshadowed by Rhaegar's brilliance and haunted by his father's fits of paranoia. With Aerys gone, Viserys became a prince of uncertain standing. Not the heir to the throne, for that was Rhaegar's place, but still of the blood royal. In the months after the wildfire plot, he was often found skulking in corners, wary of the hush that fell whenever he entered a room. Some courtiers regarded him with pity, others with suspicion. He was the boy who had worshipped Aerys, for Aerys had been the only father he'd known. Fierce, unpredictable, yet possessing that aura of Targaryen power. Now that father was dead at Rhaegar's hand, and Viserys' world had twisted into a shape he scarcely recognized. Rhaegar, mindful of the boy's confusion, tried to be gentle. He offered Viserys lessons in governance, gave him a seat at smaller councils as he came of age, and tried to fill the void of fatherhood with older brother guidance. Yet Viserys sometimes chafed, longing for the grandeur that he imagined Targaryens of old had once held unchallenged. Where Rhaegar strove for conciliation and compromise, Viserys wanted the realm to kneel and pay homage, to remember that the Targaryens had once claimed Westeros with dragons. But no dragons remained, only the old sigil and the storied might of a dynasty in flux. So Viserys learned to keep his yearnings hidden, most of the time. Amid these family dynamics, another child grew up far from King's Landing, in the rugged north. Jon Snow, known in the north as the bastard son of Eddard Stark, remained a mystery to most. Few guessed that his true parents were Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Fewer still realized that Ned Stark had vowed to keep the boy's identity a secret to spare him from the realm's hostilities. The rebellion might have ended with Aerys' death, but scars endured. Had it become known that Lyanna bore Rhaegar a son, Robert Baratheon's fury might have reignited. Or perhaps it would have further undermined Rhaegar's precarious hold on unity, especially since Rhaegar was already wed to Elia Martell. Either way, Ned believed the child was safest in Winterfell, named Snow, accepted as his own bastard, an act of deception that cost him dearly in rumors but preserved the boy's life. Lyanna Stark herself had survived the ordeal of the Tower of Joy, though the war's traumas left her frail for a time. She returned to Winterfell under Ned's care, and quietly, she watched Jon from afar, motherly love warring with the need for secrecy. Rhaegar had promised to ensure her safety and to return her to her family. But the complexities of prophecy, of love, and of political reality meant that their union remained unspoken in the broader realm. For the sake of peace, they let Westeros believe that Lyanna had simply been a captured maiden, eventually released. Lyanna did not marry Robert Baratheon. That old betrothal was dissolved after the war, leaving Robert free to drown his bitterness in wine. As for Lyanna, she stayed in the north, helping raise Jon in a quiet, understated way that made the boy think of her as an affectionate aunt, never knowing the truth. Thus, the final lineage of House Targaryen and House Stark, Jon Snow, grew up under gray skies and howling winds, blissfully unaware of his parentage. He learned to train with the sword beside his Stark cousins, to follow the old gods by the heart tree, and to yearn for the acceptance he sometimes felt he lacked. Meanwhile, the realm around him moved on, forging a fragile new era of governance under King Rhaegar. Some years passed. Rhaegar's great council decrees had taken root, establishing clearer bounds for the crown's power and guaranteeing certain rights for the great houses. Tensions remained, but open conflict did not flare. Trade with Essos expanded, spurred by the relative peace, and many small folk prospered in ways unknown under the Mad King. Repairs to King's Landing continued apace, washing away the scorched memory of wildfire blasts. Lords visited the capital to present homage or disputes, and Rhaegar presided with a measured calm that earned him cautious respect throughout the land. Viserys reached his 16th year, growing into a tall, fair-haired youth with the trademark silver-gold hair and violet eyes of House Targaryen. He was slender of build, quick to read, but sometimes too quick to anger. In corners of the court, rumors claimed he had inherited some of Aerys' temper, though never in so public or violent a form. Part of him resented living in his brother's shadow. No matter what Rhaegar offered, Viserys wanted more. He found himself quietly drawn to old histories of the conquest and the reign of the Three Dragons, dreaming of a time when Targaryens had soared over Westeros on the backs of living fire. Occasionally, his frustration boiled over in arguments with Rhaegar, who forbade any talk of seeking lost dragon eggs or dabbling in forbidden arts. Yet Rhaegar tried to channel Viserys' ambitions productively. He granted Viserys a command of a royal galley to oversee coastal matters, letting him learn the responsibilities of leadership on the narrow sea. Viserys' pride soared. He was a prince of the blood, entrusted with tasks that might expand Targaryen influence. And so he sailed along the eastern coast of Westeros, from Claw Isle to the ports near Storm's End, ensuring that taxes were paid and smugglers deterred. The small folk who dealt with him noted the flicker of arrogance in his smile, but also his willingness to enforce the king's peace. Many wondered if Viserys would remain loyal to his brother's measured rule or if, in time, he might grow restless. Meanwhile, Daenerys Stormborn bloomed in the Red Keep's gardens. Under Queen Elia's gentle guardianship, she became a bright child who listened raptly to the stories of knights and princesses, though she was shy among strangers. By the time she was 7 or 8, she could recite the lineages of the great houses from memory and was noted for her curiosity about the free cities, peppering visiting merchants with questions. She called Rhaegar Brother King, and he in turn doted on her as the last living link to his mother's generation. Sometimes, she rode in a small carriage with Princess Rhaenys or Prince Aegon through the streets, distributing bread to the poor. Other times, she lingered in the royal library, reading about Essos and daydreaming of ships that crossed the summer sea. Daenerys' presence in King's Landing brought the court a sense of continuity. She was sweet-faced and silver-haired, the image of a Targaryen princess from an older age, but untainted by the madness that had plagued Aerys. When she laughed, courtiers relaxed, as though reminded that the old horrors were truly gone. Rhaegar, for his part, made sure Daenerys received an education both courtly and practical. He had learned the hard way that Targaryen privilege without wisdom could spell disaster. So Daenerys was taught not only to sing and dance, but also to consider the needs of the realm's common folk, the intricacies of alliances, and the importance of empathy. At intervals, letters arrived from Winterfell, carried by swift riders who braved the cold. Ned Stark's correspondence was ever respectful. He addressed Rhaegar as Your Grace, and they exchanged notes about strengthening the Night's Watch, about local disputes in the north, and about the health of Ned's household. Rarely did Ned mention Jon Snow, yet each time Rhaegar felt an ache. He knew that Boy was his own flesh and blood, but acknowledging it openly might upset the realm's uneasy balance. For Ned's sake, for Lyanna's sake, he kept the secret, though it weighed on him. Sometimes, Rhaegar asked vague after the well-being of Ned's bastard nephew, and Ned would reply with curt affirmations that the boy was healthy and strong, growing tall as any Stark, and that was all. One winter, Jon Snow stood in the yard of Winterfell, chest heaving from an early morning training bout. He was nearly 14, his hair dark as a raven's wing, his eyes gray in the Stark tradition. Yet there was an un-Stark cast to his features, something in the set of his cheekbones, or in the grace with which he moved, that set him slightly apart. He sparred with Robb Stark, who was close in age, while Theon Greyjoy watched with bored amusement. "That was a decent strike," Robb said, panting, as Jon's wooden sword clacked against his own. "You've gotten quicker." Jon only nodded. He wasn't one for boasting. He had to be better than decent if he wanted to keep pace with his noble-born siblings and their proud lineage. Bastard, the yard boys sometimes called him behind his back. But Ned Stark treated him kindly, as did the Lady Catelyn in her measured, distant way, her courtesy never quite masking a certain coolness. Lyanna, though called Aunt by all, was the warmest with him, often offering a ruffle of his hair or a quiet smile that soothed his doubts. Jon turned to find Lyanna watching from the covered walkway, cloak drawn tight against the chill. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. He responded with the faintest grin, lifting his sword. The north might be bleak, but he found comfort in the sense of belonging Winterfell gave. He believed himself Ned's blood, and that was enough. Still, he had questions about his mother, about the circumstances of his birth, and no one offered him clear answers. Perhaps he would never learn the truth. That winter brought heavier snowfall than usual. The road south became impassable for weeks. Reports from the Wall grew more frequent, with the Night's Watch expressing gratitude for the resources Rhaegar had mustered. Lord Commander Corgyle, an aging Dornishman, sent word that wildling raids had abated but warned that strange sightings plagued the far north. The watchers in the high towers glimpsed odd shapes moving at night, though none could confirm what they were. The realm's southern lords dismissed these tales as frosty superstitions, but in Winterfell, the old tales of the long night never truly died. While the snows fell in the north, King Rhaegar received a different kind of tempest in King's Landing. An envoy from Pentos arrived, carrying an invitation from the magisters of the Free City. They requested a royal visit, hoping to cement trade ties, discuss the rising power of the Dothraki in Essos, and perhaps arrange a marriage alliance for some Targaryen scion. Many on the small council found the notion alarming. Westeros seldom sent its monarch across the narrow sea for anything short of dire necessity. Yet Rhaegar saw opportunity in forging a broader alliance. If the Dothraki were truly menacing the coastal regions, it might be wise to create a buffer of strong relationships among the free cities. Elia Martell, now a queen of many years, cautioned him to be selective in trusting these magisters. Their coin flows freely, but their loyalties shift with the wind. Rhaegar agreed, but he summoned Viserys to discuss the matter. "You have overseen some of our maritime affairs. What do you make of Pentos's overtures?" Viserys, standing in the council chamber with his shoulders held proudly, felt excitement stir in his gut. A royal visit to Essos? That was the stuff of grand legends. "I believe we should accept your grace," he said. "Show them that House Targaryen is not afraid to step onto foreign shores. If their concerns about the Dothraki are real, we might glean valuable intelligence. And if they merely seek advantage, then we can outmaneuver them." Rhaegar studied his younger brother's face. He recognized the gleam in Viserys' eyes, ambition, pride, perhaps the faint echo of the Mad King's taste for power. But as yet, it was tempered by the desire to impress Rhaegar. "Very well," Rhaegar said quietly. "I will not go myself, for the realm needs its king. But I will send you as my envoy with a proper retinue. Gather your ships and men. Be mindful that you represent Westeros, not just the Targaryen name." Viserys exhaled, barely containing a grin. "Yes, your grace. I will do you proud." So, early in the next year, Viserys Targaryen sailed across the narrow sea with a small fleet. Lords from the Crownlands, sworn knights, a few members of the King's Guard, and a modest train of courtiers accompanied him. Gossip abounded at court. Would Viserys return triumphant, forging new alliances? Or would he let slip his frustration at Rhaegar's moderate rule and become entangled in Essosi scheming? Rhaegar offered his brother the benefit of the doubt, hoping that travel might broaden the young man's perspective. Daenerys, only 9 at the time, watched her older brother depart with wide eyes. She pestered the harbor master for news of the fleet, then asked Elia, "Why can't I go with Viserys?" Elia only patted her hair and explained that Daenerys was still too young, and that the king wanted her to continue her studies in King's Landing. Daenerys pouted but eventually turned her curiosity back to the library, reading about the world beyond Westeros with the wonder of a child who had never stepped outside the capital. While Viserys journeyed east, Jon Snow turned 15 in the frosted courtyards of Winterfell. In that same year, Lyanna Stark, seeing Jon's skill with a blade and the restless spark in his eyes, quietly approached Ned. "He is old enough to squire for a night," she said one evening in Ned's solar, "or to join the Night's Watch, if that is his wish. But I fear keeping him here as a boy forever will only foster more questions." Her tone carried an undercurrent of sorrow. She longed to hold her son close but knew he had a destiny that might not fit neatly into Winterfell's everyday life. Ned sighed. I've thought the same. Jon is too talented to waste, and his curiosity about the world grows by the day. But where would we send him? Most knights or lords might look askance at a northern bastard." Lyanna looked at him, eyes flickering. "What if we sent him to train with the royal guard in King's Landing? As a gesture of good faith, perhaps. It would grant him an honorable path. And no one need suspect the truth." Ned paused. The idea was risky. If Jon came too close to Rhaegar, might the truth about his parentage slip out? Yet perhaps the secret was so deeply buried that no one would draw the connection. The boy had the Stark look. After all, dark hair and gray eyes. And what better place for a rising swordsman than under the watchful tutelage of the Kingsguard? "I'll consider it," Ned finally said. "But I must speak with Jon and hear his own heart on the matter. I will not force him into a life he does not desire." So it was that Ned summoned Jon to the Godswood. There, by the heart tree's pale bark, Ned explained the possibility. "You are nearly a man grown," he said softly, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I've taught you all I can, but there is more to the world than Winterfell's walls. If you wish it, I can send word to King Rhaegar, requesting that you enter service in the royal household. You would learn from the knights of the Kingsguard, perhaps earn your spurs. The choice is yours." Jon's eyes widened, heart pounding in his chest. A swirl of emotions rushed through him. Excitement, fear, longing for adventure, guilt at leaving the only home he had known. I don't know what to say," he managed. "I'd like to be worthy. But why would the king accept me? I'm only a bastard." Ned squeezed his shoulder gently. "You are of my blood, and the king respects our house. He has no reason to turn you away. I won't lie, you'll face scorn from some, but you have the skill, Jon. If it's what you desire, I'll do all in my power to see it done. Jon bowed his head, breath curling in the cold air. I want to make something of myself. I don't want to live in the shadows. If you believe King Rhaegar will have me. Ned nodded. Then it's settled. I'll send the raven tomorrow.